My name is Don Nguyen, Donnguyen. Sure. Okay. So let's see. My story. Um, hmm. So I guess I should start with like me coming to terms with like my queerness, right? Kind of like when that happened. Um, Honestly, it's like really kind of like what everyone says. Like I knew when I was like pretty young. I was like I think like 5 at the time, and there's like this boy in like my elementary class. His name was Troy. I won't give out his last name in case he's watching. But for some reason, I was like infatuated with this boy. Like I'd follow him to like the playground, follow him to like the soccer field. I don't like soccer. I don't play basketball at all. But for some reason, I just wanted to like be his friend and hang out with him. I guess like from there, like that kind of translated to like me just like finding myself kind of like being attracted to the same sex, right, or same gender, right. And from there, like I had like I guess like my like sexual awakening with like Spider-Man, right, Peter Parker. Who was the actor again? It was like Tobey Maguire, I think. Right? Yeah, so Tobey Maguire. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but with that, I distinctly remember going into my mom's like makeup stuff, right, and like getting like her beautiful like red lipstick and like just putting it on my lips, and then for some reason just taking the like Spider-Man like DVD or VHR or whatever it was and just like kissing it. Because I was just like, yes, I love you, Spider-Man. Like you're like my favorite. And like at the time, I guess like it wasn't weird to me because I was just like, yeah, like I just like this guy, just like how like I don't know, like my friend would like some other like superhero kind of thing, you know. Um, and then I think like that transition to like puberty and like really getting to like know yourself and like really starting to become like aware of like like your feelings for like people and like I don't know, people start like talking about crushes and things like that. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like super straight. What are you talking about? Yeah, like um, Megan Fox. Yeah, I was like, oh my god, I love Megan Fox. She's so hot. Yeah, like Jennifer Aniston. And I was just like in my head though, I knew that that wasn't necessarily the case, but I think I definitely tried to convince myself of it. Um, yeah, and then I guess for me, like with like kind of like growing up, you start having like sexual urges and stuff, and like I was very confused, like like oh like am I like attracted to women? Am I attracted to men? Both? Who knows, right? So for me, this is where I think like the scientist in me comes out. I kind of came up with like a way to like scientifically, like make sure, I guess, or like confirm like my sexual orientation. Oh my gosh, this is going on YouTube, right? So I ended up watching 3 different types of porn. I watched straight porn, I watched gay porn, obviously, and I watched lesbian porn. For me, this was just to like find out like oh like what gets me going, what turns me on. This is like during puberty times. I know I wasn't under, or I was under the age of 18. I'm sorry, but yeah. So I watched the gay porn. It's great, really good, really good. Watched the straight porn, and I realized I was mostly watching it for like the guy, Um, and then I watched the lesbian porn, and I was like, just like, no, I was like horrified. No offense at all, but for me, I just was like, oh my gosh, like what's going where, and like, oh my goodness, like these sounds that they're making, like, oh my gosh, and just like quickly shut off. I was like, okay, yep, I am probably gay. Right, so like that's kind of how I came to terms with that. But then I didn't grow into my queerness until like I like started going like for me I think it was college where like I defined myself as more queer rather than gay. And for me I think queer was just this bigger, more encompassing identity that doesn't necessarily like make me labeled as just strictly gay. Just because I think queer is just like more like an umbrella term that like unifies all of us better. Like queer is just kind of like, yeah, I'm queer. Like I'm, like unique, different, quirky, weird, whatever you want to say. Yeah. Sure. Okay. So, okay, it's actually really funny that you mentioned like me as a kid, because like I feel like me as a kid, like if you like looked at me as a kid, you wouldn't have thought that I would grow up to be like the guy that I am now. I was really shy as a kid actually. Like I was like the one that was like very timid, very quiet. Didn't really like hang out with like like that stranger danger type of thing, right? Yeah, and I was a big mama's boy. Yeah. I guess for me growing up, so my parents split when I was like about 8, right? So I think that was like a really big thing for me. I ended up living with my mom and my little sister, so like a very strong maternal background, and I don't know. I definitely, acknowledge the fact that we did struggle a little bit financially, just because, a single mother working, to raise 2 kids. It got to the point where, we moved back, in with my grandparents, right? And for me, like, I didn't know too much about, like, what's going on. It was just like, oh, like, we're on with our grandparents now, yay. But I do think, like, that experience, and then, like, going to different schools, like, losing my friends, and then, I ended up moving, I think, a total of like 10 times before high school, right? Just because of our situation. That kind of, set me up to kind of like grow up a certain way in terms of like, going to a school, like making friends, and then also having to recognize that like, oh, like I'm moving, bye, I'll see you later, that type of thing. And it kind of taught me how to, like kind of develop like a exterior, right? Kind of like how to like meet new people, make friends really quickly, but also, not to let them get too close to you, just because you never know when like, you're gonna move or like you lose your friends. And I think that really also carried with me in like my queer identity, because I think, for a lot of us queer folks, like we're always worried about coming out and like, the repercussions of that, if any, right? You never know who's gonna be, like supportive and who might, actually be like, sorry, no. So I think, that, kind of shaped me to be the person that where, like, I'm able to make friends really well, right? And like I have like I don't know, like, people say I have a very outgoing personality. I don't know about that. But but I guess I do go out a little bit too much, a little. But, and like, for me, I think still deep down it's like that like shy little kid who, just like kind of wants to like stay indoors, play video games, and not necessarily have to like venture out too much. Yeah. Okay, so this one it's a great story. It's embarrassing, but it's a great story. So the first person I came out to was my little sister. Her name is Dolly. Hi, Dolly. I'll come out and say it. She found out because she was looking through things that she shouldn't have been looking through, right? But also it was like my fault for like not realizing that she probably would have done that. Basically, long story short, me and her were walking home like from my grandma's, right, back to our house, and she stops a little bit. And she's like, "Hey Dawn, what does?" And I'm not gonna say what she said, but she's like, "What does this phrase mean?" And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, the only way you know this phrase is if you were looking through." I was like, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know." Keeps walking. Pause. "Hey Dolly, I have something to tell you." And then boom, I came out to my little sister. I actually think that experience was like really, really helpful to our relationship. Before then, I think there was like some, just like sibling rivalry, right? But for me to be able to come out to her and like her being the first person I came out to, like established like so much trust, I think, in our relationship. And like I started going to her for like a lot of things, like boy trouble, and just like all that stuff. And it's ironic because she's like my little sister, but she like is so knowledgeable. And yeah, and she like quickly became like my best friend and like one of my best supporters, I think. Especially like when it came to like coming out to like other people in my life, I think before I dive into talking about coming out to my mom, I want to like talk just a little bit, I think, about like what it means, at least for me, to have being queer and also being an Asian American, because I think that not a lot of people talk about like that those two identities and like the intersection in between them, and like sometimes like the consequences that like we face because of that. So for me, growing up, I was like very much rooted in like my Vietnamese, background. I was like, like I have to like speak Vietnamese. I have to celebrate like the Vietnamese holidays. I went to like Vietnamese mass, right, and all that stuff. Ate really good Vietnamese food, right. So like I was like very much like surrounded like by my culture, right. And with that, like there's this sense of like always putting family first, like this idea of like collectivism, and kind of like I don't know, like I guess like you can say like filial piety, right, where you have to like respect your ancestors, respect people who are older than you, right, things like that. But then that I think is often challenged with like this Western ideology of like individuality and like individual freedoms, and like being true to yourself, I think, and like making you like your like I guess like happiness kind of, and putting yourself first, right? And for me, I think like that always came in conflict when it came to my like identity of queerness, because it was like I know I'm queer. I like can just like I just want to scream it out loud, like how queer I am, because like it's something I'm really proud about, right? But at the same time, like I knew that like it would affect my family, especially my mom, right? What people would think about like my mom like having like a queer son, what that would mean like when we go to like family like gatherings and things like that. Just like all of that was like always in like the back of my head when I thought about coming out. And so when I finally made the decision to come out, it was the end of my senior year in college. I just graduated, and I was then going to New York for medical school, and so I had planned this like in a couple of months in advance. I was like, okay, I'm gonna come out then. Like, I don't want to, like, start my New York life with like this still, like this secret still. I don't want to still be in the closet, right? In hindsight, maybe I should have planned it a little better, because basically I told her like that night that I was then going to leave the next morning to New York, and that's debatable if I should have done that. But at the time, it just felt what was most comfortable for me, and what's like honestly what was like most safe, because like, my mom is very conservative. We grew up in a very Catholic background. She like supported Prop 8, which was like the like no on marriage equality proposition in California. She's expressed multiple times that she doesn't believe in like marriage equality, and like that that just like being gay, being lesbian is like unnatural, right? So for me, I kind of like knew that like it was going to be like an uphill battle. But I also knew that she loved me a lot, and like she's a good mother, right? So what I did was I printed out like this little like handout that was like in Vietnamese, like explaining like what it meant to be like queer, like, and what that means for you as a parent, just because like I really wanted to make sure I did this right. And so I sat her down, and in my broken Vietnamese, I told her that, Mom, I'm gay. For her, it was like, she first was shocked, right? She was like, oh no, like, how can you be gay? You're my son, like, like, I raised you better than that. And I'm like, I don't know how you didn't know, Mom. Like, I help you with your outfits, I've done your hair before, I do Dolly's makeup, And so I was like, are you really this surprised? But she just wasn't having it. She was like, oh, like, this is like unnatural. It's because you grew up in like the States, and like this is like an American thing, like this is like something that's like popular now, and like that's why you're gay. And I was like, no, Mom, like this is who I am. Like I've known that I've been gay for like a really long time, And she was like, no. Here, like, we're gonna go to church and we'll pray, right? And I was like, oh gosh, no. And from there, it was just kind of just like us just going back and forth, right? And me having to like tell her multiple times and just reclaim my queerness with her, and her like just denying it. Needless to say, like we took a time out. Like I think we both need some time to just think and talk and just think before we started saying things that we didn't mean. So I took the car, went to like my best friend's place, like just to like, mull things out, and then later that night came back and talked to her again, hoping to patch things up before I left. this time around, she had been thinking. She had obviously also been crying, right? And I came into her room. I was like, Mom, like, can we talk? Like, I still want to talk more, you know. So this was like when she was like, okay, like I can understand that you're gay, right? I can understand that you're gay and that's what you're telling me. That's it. Like, don't tell anyone else, right? And I was like, no, Mom. I told you so I could tell everyone else. I wanted to tell you first so that we didn't have to find out through, like, Grandma, right? And so, like, that was just kind of like a really big thing for me. And I kept telling her, like, no, Mom, like, I don't want to go back to the closet. I, like, want to, like, I just want to live my life, especially when, like, I'm moving to New York, I'm, like, starting the next chapter of my life. I don't want to spend half of it in the closet when I come back and visit, And she was like, why do you want to come out, like don't you think that that'll, like, affect your, like, personal, like, career, or professional career, And I'm like, no, like, I think I'll be fine. And, she was like, no, like, like, you should just stay in the closet and just, like, don't tell anyone else. And for me, like, that was just, like, a really big, like, just, like, I really can't. And, like, I kept telling her, I can't. And, we kept going back and forth about it. And, let's see. And basically it got to the point of, like me just saying, like, Mom, like, why can't you understand that I just want to be who I am, like, especially with the family, like, I want to be able to come home for, like, Thanksgiving and be able to be, like, oh, like, if someone, like, if, my aunt asks me, like, oh, like, are you dating anyone, or, like, oh, like, do you have a girlfriend, right, instead of, like, in the past where I'd be like, oh, no, I don't have a girlfriend because I'm too busy studying for school, right, I'd be able to say, oh, I actually, like, I do have one, like, a boyfriend, or, like, oh, I am dating, like, and, like, he's really great, something like that, where it just, like, can just be, like, me being a normal person, right? And she just, like, was like, why would you want that? Like, again, just, like, this idea of, like, keeping it within the like, the family rather than, like, telling everyone and, like, affecting how people look at us, and, like, all that stuff. Again, with, like, this idea of, like, I don't know, we call it, I think, like, saving face, right? And, like, this idea, like, that, how people look at you in, like, the community, and, like, how do you, like, their opinions of you matter much more than, like, your own family, I guess, right? So that was really hurtful, and, I, again, was like, okay, well, like, Mom, like, if you don't want me to, come out, then I just, I just won't come home for the holidays, right? And then she was like, yeah, like, I guess, like, that's the best thing, is just don't come home for the holidays, I think that was, like, the thing that, like, kind of struck me the most, was, like, this fact that, like, my mom was so, I guess, like, afraid of me and my queerness, that she was willing to, like, have her son, like, just be ostracized in the family, right? So that, so that really sucked. And then, from there I kind of gave up on, like, the conversation, I think. Yeah, so it didn't go the best, but honestly I was expecting the worst, but I definitely think it impacted our relationship a lot. Like, me and my mom haven't spoken in, like, I think over, like, a year and a half, and again, I grew up, like, as a mama's boy, and I think that's been, like, one of the hardest things about coming out and, like, being myself and being my truest self, is acknowledging that some people might not be ready for that, right? And, but for me, I think what helps me is just telling myself, this is better than being back in the closet, right? So, yeah. I guess for me, okay, so the most pressing issue faced, by the LGBTQ community, honestly, I think it's that we're not together, I feel like, like, while, like, yes, like, there's, like, like advancements, for, like, for folks, right, like, gay marriage, again, like, like, trans people are becoming more and more visible, more recognized, like my medical school, is becoming like one of the champions of gender affirming surgeries, right? Which is amazing. I still feel like there's like a huge splintering of like the community, and like it's hard to say. For me, it's just hard to put into words. I just feel like we're all in our own ways misfits, right? We like for some reason don't follow the status quo, like because of our queerness in whatever way, and you would think that like would unite us, right? But for some reason I feel like we just don't come together to support each other, and I think that's like so like frustrating, because I think like by supporting each other and becoming like a uniform group, we can do a lot of amazing things, right? We can like do like a lot of, I think, like policy stuff, a lot of like just like social change, things like that. But I think people might be just too tired out with like how like political things have come out, and like it's like, oh my gosh, like what did our president do this time, or like it's just like news after news of just like very disheartening things happening, and like at some point just like I'm just too tired to keep fighting. But I think by coming together as a community and supporting each other, like me supporting someone who maybe their rights are being infringed and my rights aren't, I think that's so important to recognize, because like it doesn't have to be your community that's being under attack for you to be like, hey, like that's wrong and I should do something about it. And yeah, I don't know, I guess that's like what I think. Yeah. Favorite part about being me? It's a hard question. Oh gosh. I feel that's so challenging because like there's like definitely moments where I'm like I am who I am, like this is awesome. And then there are other moments that you're just like, life would be easier if XYZ, right? But I do think something that I've always been really proud of is, I think my ability to like empathize with others, right? I feel like I'm like a very empathetic person where like, I literally can't hate someone once I've like learned like their story. Like, like I for some reason am able to be like, hey, like they're not that bad of a person, like they had like some horrible things happen to them too, I think like that, it kind of gives you some leeway to be like, hey, like I empathize with you, and I think a lot of that does come from like my background of, again, being parents of like being children of immigrants, right? Being queer, growing up with like financial instability, like growing up with like English as like my second language, like growing up being like bullied, right? I think like all of those like identities like give me like the sense of like, hey, like everyone struggles somehow, right? And I think we need to like recognize that and be there for each other. And like I think if the world was just like a little bit more empathetic to each other, a lot of problems would be like resolved really easily.